Good afternoon. I'm here today with Graham McNicoll, the CTO and co-founder of GrowthBook. Good afternoon, Graham. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. So to start with, can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Yeah, so my background's actually in physics, and then I sort of dabbled in startups for a while and volunteering in sub-Saharan Africa, and then I was at education.com for about 13 years, as most of that time as CTO. Grew education.com into a really large ed tech company, one of the largest ed tech sites, 26 million members and 6 million of the active users. And then started GrowthBook.
Hmm. And when did you start GrowthBook? I think it's fairly recent.
Yeah, I started about a year ago, so July 2020.
Wow, so it's less than a year. So you actually started a company in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. Is that safe to say?
It is, yeah. Interesting timing, although the fact that everything was virtual was a bit of a blessing, right? Because a lot of startup life is about, they always, at least what you read online, is like, go get coffee, go knock on doors. Well, it's a lot easier to do that virtually. And it's actually, well, it didn't seem like such a hassle. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of financing and like how the economy would go that I think created a lot of nervousness that was a little bit uncertain, but I think my experience has been pretty positive so far.
Yeah, and interesting. It's funny because we found out at Gaper that it was a lot easier to get people to do podcasts when they were working from home. So that was another interesting thing for us. So tell us what GrowthBook does. Who's your typical customer? What services you provide?
Yeah, so GrowthBook is a in-house experimentation platform as a service. So what we provide is a customized and flexible A/B testing platform for companies to get the power of a custom A/B testing platform without having to build it themselves. So our typical customers are high growth B2C companies with a lot of traffic who are developer focused and want tools that they can work with in-house and not have to make compromises to how their data is handled or where their metrics are coming from.
Interesting. So you said like high growth startup, but do you have a version for, those other two layers of businesses out there?
Certainly, yeah. So there's a certain fundamental limit of traffic where you kind of need to have before you can start A/B testing, right? It's typically it's around 1,000 users per variation. So if you're below that, A/B testing isn't a great tool for you. Above that, like your growth rates, if you're not a high growth, then A/B testing can be a great way to increase your growth. And if you're already a large company, growth can also be very hard because it's just less room to grow. So what we found is the typical trajectory of companies is they start with an off-the-shelf solution like Optimizely, and then they start realizing there's things they can't do with that platform, and they want to they want something else. And typically what happens is they have a data warehouse internally, and they're like, well, we have the data already. Why don't we just run experiments against that? And they end up building their own platforms in-house. And this is really, really common. But it's actually quite hard to do. These platforms are trickier than I think people give them credit for. And, as CTO, I would say, like, if there's a tool that does what you need to do and you don't have to build it and it's cheaper than it would cost to pay someone to do it, like, you should do that. And so that's kind of what we built GrowthBook for. So it ties into your existing data warehouse, and you can run experiments directly against your data. And it's just a really beautiful developer experience as well.
Yes, I would agree. As a fellow CTO, I would agree with you on that. If it's already built, let's spend resources elsewhere on our product.
Right, build value for your users, not tooling. And you'd be really surprised at the budgets that some of these companies spend just on A/B testing, like in the tens of millions of dollars. Internal testing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so like you said it was for developers. Do you find a lot of marketing people like it, or is it mainly a developer thing?
Our goal is, like, we think the marketing tools are pretty well served by Optimizely. We do have the same set of tools that Optimizely has. Like, the primary one is the visual front side editor. So you can create variations just by clicking around your website. And so we do have that as well. But primarily it's developers. So we found the most interesting experiments that you run are built through the code. So making it like tightly integrated to your code base, making so you can fork create variations really easily in code is what our platform is really good at, and also supporting like modern frameworks like React and things that optimizely is not as good as at doing.
Mm. And so you started a year ago during a pandemic. You're a small company.
Yep.
Hopefully you're going to grow.
Yeah.
Right? Hopefully. So now, now that things are getting back to normal, like, I've been out to restaurants since June 15th without a mask. So things are getting back to normal. You can see traffic's picking up in the Bay Area. Do you foresee that you're going to continue to be a remote company, or do you think someday you'll have the typical office and all that stuff?
So my co-founder is based in Austin. So we've been remote from day one. We haven't been in the same room probably in like 3 years. So
wow.
Yeah, we've been remote since day one, and I don't see a reason why we would have an office, frankly. I think, yeah, I think we've both been quite effective remote, and we've been able to communicate well. And I really enjoyed not having to commute. And there definitely are some downsides, right? Some of the social aspects of going into a business are missing, but yeah, I don't see us getting an office, at least in the foreseeable future.
And I assume you're going to grow. So, and I know that office space in Palo Alto is quite expensive.
Yeah, so. That's right. Well, and also the talent pools, right? Like, I was a CTO in Silicon Valley for a long time, and hiring engineers was exhausting and, really competitive. You had to offer a lot of money. And when we opened an office in Austin, it was so much easier to hire like really good quality engineers. Compensation was less, so the company saved money. Yeah, and that was a great experience. But I think the ultimate step on that is like, well, where's the talent that you need, and find the right person and not worry about location. I think that's pretty important.
And do you do all the development yourselves, or have you farmed that out?
All the developing for our product is done by my co-founder and I. We're both technical founders, so we haven't had a need yet to do any outsourced development. But at education.com, we did actually a lot of outsourced work with varying degrees of success. And at the end, they actually got a process down that we really liked.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a fair amount of experience with that too. Is I think the key is you really have to spell out what needs to be done and give, if it's like in a different city, different country, you have to give them a project.
Yeah, I think there's two areas. Like if you can absolutely specify what you want built, it can be quite successful. Right. Failing that, which my experience with startup is that's rarely the case. You know exactly what you want to build. Going more of a stack augmentation model can work quite well. Yeah. And in that case, making sure they're aligned in a rough time zone makes it more successful from my experience. Like we had good luck in Costa Rica with some engineers, because they could join our meetings just like a regular employee.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, if you're dealing with like 12-hour differences, it gets to be tough unless they're working your hours. I've seen that model work, but that's not always feasible.
Yeah, right. And then you worry about like their mental health, right? Like, are you making these people work being miserable, and like what's their turnover rate? If they're having to do these miserable things.
Yeah. And I think it's about 3 hours is about the right amount of time. Sometimes 4 you can get away with, which is parts of South America, but 3 seems to be like New York to the West Coast you can handle, because there's enough overlapping hours in the day.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, Graham, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been great talking to you. Great talking to a fellow geek in Silicon Valley. And I wish GrowthBook. I'm sorry. Yeah. I googled GrowthBook. There's a bunch of stuff a bunch of books about it. By the way,
there are a lot of books. Some of them. There's also like a child development app called GrowthBook as well. So yeah.
Well, thank you again, and have a great week.
Yeah. Thanks so much.